Hello, and I'm Ellie Witter with the Miami University Alumni Association. And I am very excited to welcome you to our webinar this evening, Gender Revolution, a community conversation on gender. Tonight's webinar is sponsored by the 1809 LGBTQ Alumni Group, plus and Oxford area PFLAG. And I am joined by Sabrina Jewell from Oxford's PFLAG to moderate the panel this evening. Sabrina, would you like to welcome PFLAG?
Hello, welcome everyone. We're very excited to collaborate with the 1809 group. We've done this a couple of times. This is our first virtual event, however. And I am the treasurer of PFLAG. I've been a longtime ally of the LGBTQ plus community, and I am now a family member. So welcome and thank you. Let's have...
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So tonight we will engage in conversation about the National Geographic documentary Gender Revolution, as well as a discussion of local resources and experiences related to gender identity. There will be an opportunity for questions from the viewer, so please submit your questions in the link just below the screen. But now I'm honored to welcome our panelists, but we will have them each introduce themselves. So kind of going around the screen. Anne? Oh, you're muted. Oh, Anne, you're muted, Anne.
Muted. Anne, there you go.
Yes, hi, I'm Ann Barrett Wicks. I am a member of PFLAG and a grandmother of a transgender teen.
Now you're muted, Ellie.
Goodness. I'm sorry. And Rachel?
Hello, I'm Rachel Snedecor. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm one of the physicians who work in the Transgender Health Clinic at Cincinnati Children's, seeing patients from as early as age 3 to their 25th birthdays when our patients graduate.
Thank you, Rachel. Joy?
Hi, I'm Joy Snow. I am one of the current co-chairs of the 1809 LGBTQ Miami Alumni Board. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful. I'm also obviously a former student in Miami and a transgender woman myself.
Thank you, Joy. Kate?
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Kate Kuvalanka, and I'm a faculty member at Miami. I'm in the Department of Family Science and Social Work, and I am also a PFLAG board member. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Kate. And Christina?
Hi, I'm Christina Miller. I'm a PFLAG board member. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm also here today as a parent of a transgender child. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I will turn it over to Sabrina now.
Hello. So I think one of the things that we want to do is discuss, I'm hoping you all had a chance to review the documentary, which I got to watch again yesterday for probably the third time. And how are we creating opportunities in small towns? I know we're very thankful to have Children's Hospital down in Cincinnati, but in Oxford and other small towns around the country, how do we create more awareness and support for the LGBT community and their families? Christina, would you like to take that?
Sure. I know one of the ways that we're doing it in Oxford is through organizations like PFLAG. There are also several organizations that are part of Miami University, both for students and the broader community. I know some of my peers on this panel can speak in more detail about the specific offerings of the university. But on a community level, organizations like PFLAG host community events where it's very clear that there's an open and welcoming presence for the community. For my child, that required a lot of outreach too with their school, so that the support system of the school understood what was going on with my child and kind of our expectations as parents for the way we wanted the school to respond. And that just that process alone created a whole ripple effect of conversations with multiple families, and then the school actually becoming an ally and intervening on occasion to bring families of children that were sharing the classroom with our child into the conversation, so that when the children came home with stories about, their friend in class who, says that they're transgender, the children were equipped, but the parents weren't necessarily equipped to follow up on those conversations. So those are some of the ways that it's been happening for us.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. There's some loud noise in my background, so I was hoping you wouldn't hear that when I got on. Just to piggyback on what Christina was just saying, just in thinking about the stories that I've heard from families over the years, one thing I maybe should have mentioned when I was introducing myself is that I've been doing research with parents and caregivers of transgender children, transgender and gender diverse children over the past decade. And so some things that I've heard from them, especially those who are in small towns, so when they're not in cities where maybe supports for LGBTQ people and trans people in particular are more visible, it is, like Christina is saying, it's the schools, it's the religious institutions, it's the athletics, the sports, where people gather on an everyday basis, where people can be doing things to make LGBTQ people and trans children, adolescents, and adults feel more welcome by doing little things and having conversations and educating themselves about the people who are around them and those in their community, and how to be more welcoming.
Thank you so much, Kate. So kind of going off of that, how can society help to expand our understanding, to be more inclusive of gender? What are some tips, maybe Rachel, that might be something that you can help us with? What are some tips just to expand our understanding?
Definitely, it's your own personal motivation, but also it's asking, from a lot of my patients, it really varies in how I can support them. Many folks, it could be, making sure the school's a safe place. So we work with a lot of school systems, and luckily, thank goodness, nowadays it's getting so much easier as many school systems have gender diverse students, so they know exactly how things work. Or it could be simple things like making sure that there's safe bathrooms in the community. It could be making sure that the school has resources and tools as well to make sure that they have a affirming place for students, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to how to support somebody, even in a small community. There are online resources, there are online groups where you can figure out how best to support students and community members, like GLSEN, GLSEN. They have wonderful resources and a great online community where you can absolutely hit them up. PFLAG, of course, too, as well, always has wonderful resources to be able to use in a school-wide network. But really, it comes down to a personal thing. So I often ask patients, how can I support you? What would you want to make the environment around you more affirming? Is it family level, community level, educational level? Is it worldwide? Do you want to be able to travel countries and have a carry letter that supports your gender identity? So lots of answers to that.
Thank you. One of my questions is that when a family comes to the children's clinic, I'm assuming there's a multidisciplinary team that works with them. Can you describe that a little bit for us, Rachel?
Absolutely. We're very blessed at Cincinnati to have a huge mega team. So due to COVID, you won't meet as many members of the team in person right now since we're limited who can be in clinic. But every visit you will meet a provider. We have 2 physicians, we have a nurse practitioner, and also we do sometimes have learners with us, like our fellows, who are pediatricians training to specialize in adolescent care. You do have in clinic our social work team, so that will be a 2-member team. Usually you'll meet one of the people. We also have a clinical assistant who runs our family Facebook group. We say we have over 2,000 patients in clinic now, so that's a lot of different parents who are going through the process. So That's kind of their support peer system that we link them into. We also have a chaplain that works at our clinic because a lot of our patients have spiritual struggle and spiritual needs that we can help provide positive resources for with her. Now, branching out from our clinic, there's not just them. We also work closely with our OB-GYN team, and we work with our endocrinology team. Now, they work on the puberty blocker side. We usually do adolescent medicine, which is my specialty, and branch out from there. We have the ethics team. We're deeply involved with the public relations team, the government team. We also have, who am I forgetting? Our psychiatry team that we work closely with, multiple like social workers and therapists throughout 6 different states, because we do see patients from a 6-state catchment area. And there's somebody I'm forgetting them or feel awful about later, but it's a lot of folks that, you know, come together as a large interdisciplinary team that make sure that we're meeting all of our patients' needs and anything that may pop up, because everybody's different in terms of what they come in needing.
Wow, that's a lot. So when a family first comes in, do they book a couple of days so they've got appointments several in a row, or do they come back every couple of weeks? How does that work?
So the first visit is quite limited. We don't want to overwhelm somebody. So it's just going to be really the provider. It's going to be social work team. And we kind of go from there. We see who do you need to meet with, who's on your to-do list for people you need to meet with. Right now, because of COVID, the chaplain and the clinical assistant are mostly meeting people virtually. If they meet the requirements for puberty blockers, which they mentioned in the documentary, that would actually be a referral. So it may be a few weeks before you see either endocrinology or OB-GYN team. If it is for hormones, that's a whole set of checklists. You have to have, you know, evaluation by us in the medical team. And depending on your age, it could be a matter of days too. It could be months or years, depending on what the requirements are and what's needed for patients.
That's amazing. And thank you for the work that you do. So when we're in the collegiate area, so you're working with more, well, you're working with kids up till they're 25. So in the university situation, like Miami University, do we have support set up for individuals who are LGBTQ, but specifically trans? And I don't know who that question really is to. It maybe a Kate, maybe a Joy.
I know there are therapists in the area, so we do refer out around the Oxford area. We have a long list of therapists that we've vetted and people that we've worked with before. So we refer people to therapists who are close to home, but people usually come on college breaks to the clinic.
So it's actually kind of unfortunate that Maria's not here, because Maria is our like gender specific therapist at in Oxford at Miami. And we were really lucky to have that you can kind of, as a freshman, even almost a decade ago, look at the walk into the counseling services and say, hey, I would like to talk to someone who is knowledgeable about gender identity. And that even though a lot of the services available in Oxford, not through any fault of the town, just because it's a very small town, are limited, that is one thing that is actually that is available to the students, at least of Miami, although I can't speak to the availability of it to the wider community.
I'm on the mental health subcommittee of the Coalition for a Healthy Community, and one of the things we do is quarterly update our list of therapists and counseling services available within the Oxford area. And it's been really interesting with the telehealth coming into play. How far do we go out? And that still hasn't been really answered. But one of our issues in Oxford is not only are we small, but most of our therapists are aging out. And so I know of maybe 4 off the top of my list that work with LGBTQ individuals and their families. But we're not getting an influx of new therapists, young therapists coming in, which is something we need to work on. And I'm not sure I guess the more we talk about it and promote it and encourage it, it'll come. Puberty blockers. I have a lot of people ask me about this, and only because I'm involved with PFLAG do they even ask me about it. And I say, I don't know much beyond that's what it does. They are pausing the puberty process and allowing time for individuals and their families to make some very serious and lasting decisions. Would anybody like to talk about that?
I can definitely take it, unless anybody else wants to talk about them as well.
I think it's best that you kind of start that conversation, given the one with the medical background.
All right, I'll give the boring explanation of it. So biologically, the reason why puberty blockers work is they're both something called the GnRH agonist. That's gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone is something released by the brain that essentially triggers the development down pathways to get to the sex hormones, so testosterone and estrogen. That's kind of boiling down with a lot of steps, but just jumping ahead. So as they mentioned in documentary, this is a reversible medication. You have two options that are available. You've got the implant, which is Vantis, usually lasts 1 to 2 years. We try to keep it in 2 years tops. Then it has to be replaced if you go beyond 2 years. You've got your Lupron, which is your injections. The folks usually do it about every 1 to 3 months. Usually 3 months is what we aim for, because the less injections, the better. Who likes getting a shot every month? No. Both of these medications, it's merely a patient's choice in which way they'd like to go. However, insurance often may not cover the medications themselves. So really things have to be run by insurance and patient preference. When I meet a patient for the first time, I have to determine, one, if they're a candidate for puberty blockers. You have to actually be in the early stages of puberty. There are 5 stages of puberty. You have to be stage 2, which is really early beginnings. If I determine a patient is at least the stage 2 of puberty, then I will decide, we'll talk about risk and benefits of blockers. We'll talk about how they're reversible, how you do need to be monitored on them, because if you're not getting hormones, it could affect bone health after many years of use. As they mentioned in the documentary, yes, we do have data. We've got at least a decade of data. We know what the effects are on the hormones into adulthood, but I still don't know yet how it affects our 70 to 90-year-olds. So we want to be as safe about bone health as possible. So people are regularly tracked and examined on bone health while they're on the medications. So that's something we have to consider. And also really just give them a lot of education about what the medication does. How long are people on it? Do you transition straight to hormones? Do you come off puberty blockers? What happens? Often they will transition to hormones if that's the plan. So it's a lot of considerations we've got to have on each way. But the thing that is comforting to parents is that, it is reversible if a child did wish to go through the puberty that their body was going to go through. Have I, in all the patients that I've ever had get puberty blockers, ever made that decision to go back? No. Actually, all of them have gone on to do gender-affirming hormones in the future. But we do send, if I had to estimate, at least probably 1 patient at least every other month, more like at least 1 a month per provider. So we're seeing a significant amount of patients. We do have some patients that we see on an every 6-month basis just for a puberty watch. So the second that they start puberty, we go to the blockers and we go from there. The research that we've done on patients who do puberty blockers is very, very positive. You will see patients who are in the beginning stages of puberty having a lot of dysphoria, effects on mental health, anxiety, depression, that you just see kind of just breathe a sigh of relief when they get onto blockers. And also it's a very smooth transition as well into going into gender-affirming hormones. However, how often do we catch patients at that perfect timing to benefit from blockers? Some patients, the ship may have passed, they're at the end of puberty. Some patients, they maybe have not gotten their family to be on the same boat until they're older. You've got to have kind of a family that's well-versed, a family that's supportive. You've got to have a family that is, educated on what's out there, which is hard because it's not so easy to pick up an endocrinology journal and be like, yes, GnRH agonist, I know all about this. It's tough, but I really laud the families that we do catch on time and have that opportunity.
And am I correct that most puberty happens kind of 12 to 15, and so they're underage and would need parental or guardian consent?
Absolutely. And some puberty begins as early as age 8 and 9 in people who are assigned female at birth. So it's a young age for some folks. But yeah, you do have to have parental consent. And usually we want if there are two parental decision makers, we want to have them both in the same boat as well. So sometimes it's hard. One party may be like, let's do it. The other party might be kind of shuffling their feet. And if it's devastating for the patient, that's when things get complex and when ethics may need to get involved. But luckily that's very rare.
Yeah, and I think Rachel would attest to this is a lot of times when issues come to trans kids, the first thing that anyone says is the medical aspect. And of course, they always jump to surgery, which obviously just doesn't happen. And then hormones, which for the most part doesn't happen. You'll get as far as puberty blockers. But I put this question to Rachel about how much of your interaction with gender diverse or gender questioning youth is around puberty blockers and how much is around the social element and just dealing with being trans.
That does vary a lot by age. So for our kids who present in their teenage or early years, so let's break it down to our age group. So I mentioned age 3 is the earliest. Our age, usually 3 to 11 or 12-year-olds, it's all social. Like we're not really talking about much at that point. Yes, we may discuss like a little hint of puberty blockers, talk about what they are, how they exist, give some information on them, like especially for our kids who may be starting to hit puberty. But really it's working on school, preschool, like is the school supportive? How are family members doing? Can we help them? Do you need the chaplain? Then also our kids who are puberty age, they may or may not be discussing puberty blockers. The youngest we can start people on hormones would be age 14. So that's really a while longer. Sometimes I will get some 14-year-olds, that's what they want to talk about, but that would probably be about 70% talking about social concerns, 30% hormones. Now, 18-year-olds are a big different scenario. 18-year-olds may have been thinking about gender identity for about the last almost a decade. They come in years of thinking about things, but maybe family wasn't supportive. Maybe they just didn't have the resources nor the information or the access even. I've had patients who are like, we've seen 5 providers before we got to you finally. But at that point, the 18-year-olds who come in, usually they're actually majority hormone talk because they've been waiting for this forever. And they're like, now that I'm 18, I can make my own legal decisions and sign my own consent. That's why I'm here. But we're still talking a lot about the social aspect too as well.
Yeah, exactly. So just a lot of it, when it comes to trans youth, so much of the focus is on the medical side. And the reality is that's such a minor, well, not a minor part of it, but it's such a smaller part of it in comparison to the social aspect of it and just being trans.
Okay, so we're talking about social, we're talking about medical, but we also need to talk about the safety of the individual. And in my work as a social work type person in Oxford, who mostly deals with senior citizens, I often get called by the Family Resource Center who are trying to work with a young individual who has just become 18 and their family has rejected them. And so how do we provide resources? And that's one of the hard things about Oxford. We are an incredibly generous community, but we do not have a homeless shelter. We don't have a lot of things. And so we rely heavily on relationships with Lighthouse Youth Services and checking in with GLSEN and finding funding, for a hotel stay for a couple of nights while we're trying to put some resources together. And these are the ones that they haven't had family support clearly. And so finding space that is safe, that they can get the medical and mental counseling they need, but also they're a place where they can start to thrive and be supported. And I think that is, from my point of view, colleges are working hard to create more safe spaces like that. But I think that even in Oxford, Ohio, which has, this lovely new high school, well, it's probably 10 years old at this point, but we're pretty rural in a lot of our thinking. And that saddens me and is a little bit frightening also. Oh, do we have Maria coming in?
Hello.
I'm so sorry, my internet has been out.
No worries at all. Thank you so much. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
I'm Dr. Maria Carrubba-Whetstine, and I am a psychologist at the Counseling Center, and I'm the coordinator of LGBTQ IA services.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
We're now talking a little, awesome. We're now talking a little bit, we've talked a little bit about medical and some social, but then also kind of going into safety. But we actually had a question from the audience that came, and I think actually maybe Anne and Christina, you might be great ones to answer this question, is how, as parents or grandparents, how can you best prepare yourself to have that discussion with your children or grandchildren about all the different things that we've been talking about?
Okay, I'll go first with that. Actually, when I saw the question in the chat, it was also asked about how I handle that for myself in my religious environment. Well, actually, I didn't have to talk to my grandson because he told me. And he's been very open, and we've had really good conversations, I feel like, around it. And he has been the one who's been educating me. But the basic thing is the minute we heard about it, we just were we wanted to know, we wanted to learn as much as we could and support him the best we could. So I think education, PFLAG is the place I started, really. And I am very thankful for the many things I've learned through them. The way to support a teenager is to, I think, is to listen to them. Now, when it comes to a religious situation, I don't even like to say this, but I'm going to say it. Fortunately, our grandson doesn't have a religious affiliation. I do, however, and in fact, we're leaders in our faith community. So the way we have handled this is it doesn't bother me with my faith, but I know that the community that we're in, it does, to have transgender people among them who are in their community. So we see our role as just gently telling people what it is, and that's all.
Thank you for that. Christina, do you want to weigh in?
Well, it might just help to hear a little bit about how our experience went. So I've been a supportive LGBTQ ally for a long time, and, really observed my child growing up and thought, let's leave the doors wide open here, because some of the signs that I'm seeing indicate that my kid might not, just align with the gender that they were assigned at birth. And sure enough, we even chose a name originally that was non-binary, not because we had the foresight or anything, but because that was our belief system. So entering this, pretty wide open. But I can't say I was nervous the first day of school. It wasn't the first day of the school year, it was in the middle of the school year. And my child was determined, like, can I dress like a girl today? Like, the only thing that would qualify as girl in our closet was a pink t-shirt that they had actually picked out and designed for themselves, a while before. So it was really just a matter of not questioning, really saying, that's what you'd like to do? Sure, let's do that. And kind of carrying forward the desire and really making good on it. So even after that first day of school, we went to the secondhand clothing store and they picked out their first outfit that they felt truly was theirs and they were comfortable in it. And then we went to the playground to play in that new outfit and with this new thing. And I was the one how do I tell people, what do I do? And it was really just a matter of being oh, you haven't seen Raya in a while. I didn't want to say the name. You haven't seen my child in a while. Well, they're now introducing themselves with she, her, hers, move ahead 2.5 years. And now we're in a phase where we're transitioning a bit again to a much more of a preference for non-binary identity. And we're going with they, them, theirs pronouns. And that's grammatically a bit more of adjustment, but we're in the flow now. And school was very, open. And I just heard that last week, there was a great conversation at school within the classmates in the classroom to bring everybody up to speed on what that meant. So going with the flow and not challenging the question. Somebody put it in a way that I thought was interesting recently. It's like, how do you know? How do you know what your child is saying? And I hope this doesn't seem too simplistic, but for people that are really questioning or challenging it, it's like, how do you know you're right-handed or you're left-handed or you're ambidextrous? Like, you just know. It's not something that is a problematic aspect of one's identity. So I hope that helps a little bit.
That was great. That was great. Okay, sports. Oh, Kate.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to build off on what Christina was saying. I think because one of the questions was just talking. Maybe this wasn't what the question was, but talking with kids in general. Kind of what Christina's saying is going with the flow, being open. I think all parents can do that. I have a 10-year-old who, so far as we know, is cisgender. And from a young age, I just tried to be very open to referring to my child as my child and not putting on him, not talking about him as my son, just always referring to him as my child. And so just letting my kid grow up to be, who they are. Same thing, with clothing choices and all that, just letting my kid have a choice. And so I think all parents can do that. There are great books out there now. So like I Am Jazz is out there. And so my kid knew early on what it meant to be transgender, and then explaining non-binary, because of course the I Am Jazz book is very binary trans, but talking about that, they can get it from a young age if you are just willing to have those conversations with them just about the expansiveness and the the complexities of gender. Just in their language, they can get it and they're open to hearing about it. So my kid, I have this story from when we were at elementary school for an open house night or something where all the different clubs were, you could walk around and see what the different clubs were, and they were having Girl Scouts. And so my child was asking, so Girl Scouts, who can go there? Do they have Boy Scouts too? And I'm like, I'm not sure if they do. And I was getting ready for a conversation about Boy Scouts because I have some issues with the political, with that organization. But his idea was that why don't they have Friend Scouts? Because what about the kids who don't identify as girls or as boys? And I'm like, that is a great question. Actually, Girl Scouts do accept everyone, but, and I think the Boy Scouts now do too, to kind of taking after them. But anyway, we can do, parents and teachers of cisgender kids, all children, we can be teaching them about the expansiveness of gender and not just waiting for trans kids to come out as trans.
All right, so I'm going to go into the sports situation because I recently listened to an interview. I think it was with Megan, is it Rapinoe, who's on the women's soccer team?
Rapinoe, I think, or I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, I guess.
And they were like, it doesn't matter your sex, come and play with us. And so I know there's been a lot of controversy politically, because everything has to be politicized these days, in who can play. And, one of the programs that we had at Miami, and I think we still do, is the You Can Play initiative, that we don't care what your gender or sex is. Well, I think gender is still an issue, and that's my question is, it's one thing to be playing, soccer at the Tri when you're 5, but it's a different thing in college. But, I will say that both my children who played soccer and who were cisgendered, they loved their co-ed teams. Those were their favorite teams. And when our daughter ran track, who knew she was going to do that? It was so fun because she was competing not directly with the males, but they were all together doing the similar events, and it wasn't just all divided. And so I guess I'd love to hear thoughts, questions.
Well, I can go ahead and say something. And I want to preface this by saying I'm not a sporty person. I was the cool kid in school who did speech and debate and marching band. That being said, I always love to point out in this discussion that it always completely ignores trans men, as a lot of the transgender discussions do, is that it's always talking about how much all these secret men are trying to infiltrate women's sports so that they can do whatever, as if high school sports are the most sacred thing in the world. But also, they never talk about the fact that through the same logic, they're having individuals who are transgender males compete with like women, and then they do have the physical advantage. But for what that is worth. However, to kind of go off that, it's just, it always is blown up as this giant issue, and I think people are really underestimating the fact that just because you might have a male body or male hormones doesn't mean that you automatically have this huge advantage at sports, especially in a team sport like soccer or football or baseball. One player does make a difference, but one player is only ever going to be one player.
People don't realize that even in sports where, you can definitely compete with your gender identity, there are particular guidelines. So in order for somebody who is transmasculine to compete in the men's sport, obviously, yeah, I totally agree that it is easier often for somebody to be on the men's team. There are particular testosterone levels you have to have sometimes to make sure you're within normal range, but especially in somebody who's trans feminine going to a women's sport, there are particular testosterone levels they have to have as well. So to be, in the normal feminine range, which I believe the IOC actually does have guidelines for that, where they had to be, I think it was below the 200s. Don't quote me on that, but yeah, there are particular numbers they have. Now, Ohio does have state guidelines. I do get high school patients often asking about whether or not they can compete in the sport that aligns with their gender identity. And yeah, unfortunately, I say the same thing. It is easier to be on the men's team if you're transmasculine than to be on the women's team if you're trans feminine. It does vary school by school. I've had some schools where they are affirming and they will let them play on the team. Like I've had multiple sports, actually. It was easier for the patients who have been on puberty blockers and never really developed that masculine puberty than for people that did go through the masculine puberty. In fact, I'm trying to think if I have anybody who did go through masculine puberty right now on the women's team, and I don't think I do. Yeah, it does vary. The school systems can be much more affirming than others sometimes.
Kate?
Sure. And Christina, did you want to go? I didn't mean to jump over you if you did. Okay. And there is a piece of legislation that was introduced in Ohio. So I think is it HB? I wrote it down, HB 61, I think. So the possibility or the trying to ban, I think it's trans students from participating in high school and college athletics. And so I do think we get so focused on this and so caught up, and Joy is exactly right in terms of thinking about it's the trans girls and the trans women that people are focused on. And taking a step back and thinking about how beneficial it is for kids to participate in sports. We've got a whole body of research about how beneficial it is to be a part of a team. There's research about schools that have trans inclusive or LGBTQ inclusive policies, such as allowing kids to participate on sports teams, that increases feelings of school belongingness. Like there are just so many benefits that we see. And so it's just really unfortunate that people are using this, playing upon this as something that we should be fearful of when it's really doesn't appear to be a problem anywhere. Some people have pointed to certain states where it's become an issue, but in terms of the potential benefits to a group that is already so vulnerable and marginalized, we just have an opportunity to not further marginalize them by allowing them to participate in school sports.
Christina, were you interested in talking about this subject?
Well, I'd love to go to the recommendation in the chat really quick. I just wanted to say that it is frustrating, even in youth sports. I'm talking like 10 and below, to have there are very few seasons where they have co-ed teams. Sorry if I'm using they're not having they're not open to everyone. You have to choose, and it really. Raya was welcomed. I keep doing that, but they were welcomed into their, the choice. And now that they're opting to not identify as either, it puts us in a real tricky situation unless there is a season where it's mixed.
Yeah, so we'll go back to Maria. Earlier in the conversation, we were talking about what are some of the resources at Miami available to students. Joy shared some of their experiences, but Maria, from obviously being in student counseling, what are some of the resources available?
I think there's a lot of resources available through the Counseling Center in terms of individual therapy, helping folks access places that they could start hormones, or even just having a place to talk through gender identity issues. We also do letters for surgery and for hormones if doctors require it. That's really changing a lot now to more of an informed consent model, which is really nice. But I think what we mostly end up doing is helping folks kind of explore where they're at and where they want to go. I think another thing I try to help them do is if parents are open to having a conversation with us or with them or with me, trying to bridge that and to help them understand what's going on with their kid. And other resources, there's great groups, there's Spectrum. And so there's great groups on campus. I think a lot of people receive a lot of informal support through the Women's Center specifically. So I think there's a lot of places on campus that are very good. The whole campus, we got a long way to go.
At Miami, if a child or a student, sorry, they're my children, so I call them children. If they don't have insurance, health insurance, or they don't want their family to know that they're looking at going to counseling, how can they still access the counseling?
Oh, actually very easily. That's our best kept secret, but not really supposed to be a secret. So really what it's supposed to be is your first 3 are covered by your student health, but the only way that we're able to bill is through the bursar, which means your parents would know. And it says student health, but what are you doing at student health once a week for 50? I mean, nobody can explain that to their parents. So I think what anybody who just needs privacy, or anybody whose parents or themselves don't have the money to cover it, we just waive the fee. All they need to do is fill out a form. No one's ever been turned away. And we have at points also had funding through student affairs for folks who wanted to get therapy outside the counseling center and needed to access funds. So money should never be a barrier for folks.
And is that something that's easy? So I knew about this, but I only knew about this because I was at a presentation where it was asked about specifically, and Steve Large was more than like, oh yeah, no, if you have a problem, you come see me, you send them to me. And I'm like, okay. But what did I want to say? The getting referrals and getting access, like if they were going to go down to Children's Hospital or counseling or consulting, what about things like transportation?
I don't know if the funding would help with that. I know that it covers appointments for sure, but I don't know if it would cover transportation.
I mean, because that's such a huge lack in the Oxford area. Yes, Kate.
Yeah, I had Hannah Thompson, who was the previous associate director for LGBTQ services on campus. They and I talked about this a few times because there are some faculty who have given rides to students. I know I've given students rides to Hamilton when going through changing their names, and so needing to go to certain places to make that happen. And so it's a really great point that is something that we could do. Is I know there are faculty and staff who would be so willing to do that transportation piece for people who need it. So thank you for reminding me about that. I can talk with whomever the new person is. Hopefully we'll get that new person to replace Hannah. I did just want to put a plug in for that. Many of us have been a part of those conversations where whoever that person is, we need to put resources into that position, because that person, Hannah, did so much across campus in terms of supporting not only students, but then trying to help educate and support faculty. It's the job of 3 people at least. And so we need to keep pushing for that, the upper administration, to give that role the support that it really needs.
Well, and the other thing to follow up on that is that they're losing Rhonda Jackson at the end of the semester, who's retiring. And she's the one very, very knowledgeable person who's been there a long time. And so how do we help support this new group with Law and his new team? And maybe this is a way that PFLAG can help in terms of offering transportation for kids. That's something that's pretty easy. The liability part can get a little funny. And I know this just because we provide transportation for seniors in and around Oxford, but I give people rides all the time. And I think that is something that we could absolutely put out to Spectrum, to the student services, that if you are needing this, ask for it.
Yeah, I think we have that ability because faculty take students on trips. And so there are just waiver forms that you have students sign, basically if they won't sue you or whatever, I think, if, there's an accident. But I think we can look into that. I think it's a great idea. And yes, another plug for Rhonda, who's done so much over the years, including Sabrina, I hadn't given you this update that Rhonda just gave me an update today. And hopefully in the fall, we will have the open door clothing closet. We had written a grant last year to bring a clothing closet to Miami's campus, specifically for any student who needs it, but especially for trans and gender diverse, gender nonconforming students, so that just having clothes available that students can come try them on and take whatever they want home. And Rhonda has done an amazing job of actually making that a reality, given the turnover that's happened in the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion this year. And so she went down, a student went down to talk with Transform Cincinnati. Is that what it's called? The group down there. Yeah. To get tips on how to make this clothing closet work. So Rhonda has just been amazing in that regard. And it's going to be a huge loss for Miami when she goes.
I think it's going to be a hard time for her leaving, to be perfectly honest with you. is a very nurturing person.
She's going to leave
Sabrina.
a huge hole,
Absolutely.
personally and emotionally. She's a huge support for students.
Yeah, which actually kind of leads into a question that we did receive in the chat, or in the questions is, in addition to standing up as a bystander, how can the Oxford community be allies and supportive of individuals and families in our community who are trans? So I would take that as both student as well as just the larger Oxford community. And maybe Anne or Joy or Christina, let you jump in on that.
So I think the question is how can we help the wider community? I'm not exactly sure. But was bystanders. Yes. Okay. I think every conversation you have can be a support, just by letting them know that you, as a member of whatever group that you're in, that if you can just speak up, basically speak up and say something, and don't let comments go by that that you could address them. I think I also said at the beginning that education is so important, and those who are bystanders who really want to do something, I think reading, learning, watching the DVD that we were watching for a starter, but go beyond that and learn as much as you can, and then find ways to talk to others about it in any conversation that you have.
Yeah, a lot of it just goes back to, as Anne said, making sure that people who are part of the community and are questioning gender know that there's support for them.
Yes.
I grew up in a very conservative small town. If I can take a moment to just tell like a short story, is back when I was in high school, I did an experiment on deviancy where I wore women's clothes to school for a week. Anyone it was an experiment. I was being trans. Anywho, but I remember on one day, I go into lunch, and I at that particular day was wearing like 4 or 5 inch like purple heels. They were awesome. I love them. But the vice principal came up to me and he says, he's like, "Hey, why are you wearing that?" And I'm like, "I just felt like it." And he's like, "Well, it's kind of distracting, you know. I'd kind of appreciate it if you like, you know, changed, wore something else if you have other shoes." And I was like, ah. And I knew he couldn't really make me, but like I was like, I don't really want to make a deal with the administration. I'm in my senior year. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. I went back to my table and I was just kind of sitting there. And this girl who I did have in class, I knew who she was. She wasn't a friend of mine. I didn't know her last name. She was just someone who happened to exist. And she came up to me and she's like, "He can't make you do that." And I went, "Well, it's like he has no right to make you do that. You can wear whatever you want. There's nothing he can do about that. And like, if you want to wear them, you should wear them. They're great shoes." And I went, yeah, you're right. And I kind of went back up to him and I said, "Hey, I was thinking about it, and I think I'd rather keep these on." And he immediately just went, "Yep, that's fine, whatever." And he was very much in the, "I'm not touching that. I'm letting that go." And I'm not going to say that's going to be the situation in every school or in every place, but like to me, that was something I was like, I'm just going to deal with it. I don't want to rock the boat. But one person who I didn't know came up to me and said, "Hey, you should keep wearing those." And that's what I did because I wanted to. And it seems like such a minor thing. And like looking back, it really is. But at the same time, here we are. We're 9 years later. And actually, gosh, over 9 years later, almost 10 years later. And I still am thinking about that and still am talking about that. So you really don't know how much a small act of saying, "Hey, I'm here, I support you," you don't know how far that'll go.
Absolutely. And reaching out just to anybody who's in need and of support and some kindness. Christina, I was thinking back to your conversation about the sports teams and wondering if we could write a letter collectively from PFLAG and possibly get other groups that would sign on with us in regards to, while they're young, let's let them play. The whole point is for exercise and team building. And so I don't know if that's something that would be attractive or effective, but it certainly seems like as advocates, that's something we should sort of take a stand on.
That would be great. I think that's a good move. There are always going to be, the select teams, where they're going to start separating out of the group because of real talent and so on. But there are plenty of kids for whom, the college equivalent is like intramural sports, right? There are plenty of kids that just love to play. They're not aspiring to be competitive athletes, in their particular area. But for my child, there are so many situations where it gets complicated because you go to the swimming pool and the changing rooms are gendered. You go to, you want to take a gymnastics class because my kid's really interested in parkour kind of stuff and they want to learn how to, well, there's the boys class and the girls class. And so there are so many circumstances where we run into that environment. I wanted to add, this is a little bit of a segment, but one thing that is really helpful just to change even kids' thinking around this kind of stuff is often you still hear, hey, you're out on the playground. There's a bunch of kids. Do you want to play a game? Okay, now let's divide up boys and girls. And often when I'm witness to those kinds of activities, I saw it this winter when there was sledding at the community park and there was a snowball fight afterwards. And that was sort of the parental insertions like, well, let's come up. You guys are, you're all wearing different colors. How about we pick, by your favorite color? Who likes dark colors, who likes light colors, or who likes this, who likes that, and who's lost a tooth, who hasn't lost a tooth. I don't know. There's all kinds of ways that you can create teams that aren't based on the typical way that we do it. So there's a lot of room for improvement with youth sports.
So just a funny plug is circus arts is totally inclusive. And I think there's some circus arts down in Cincinnati. I happen to know a really good program in St. Louis, though, if you're interested.
That would be fun. My kid too, so circus arts might be just.
And I know your family a little bit. Okay, Ellie posted about resources, other resources.
Yeah, so a question came into the chat of what are other resources that you all would recommend for individuals who want to learn more and want to understand more about gender diverse individuals? What are some other things? Like the documentary that we encourage everybody to watch is great, but what are some other great resources for everyone to look at, read, watch?
So a little plug for Oxford area PFLAG, one of our big initiatives that we copied from, which is what do they say? It's the most pleasant form of flattery is to copy somebody. Is the Dayton area or Dayton PFLAG chapter had started a rainbow reading program, and I think we started our chapter in 2014, and we went up to a Ohio conference that Dayton hosted and learned about their rainbow reading program. And so that has been one of our initiatives that we have been able to raise money for and donate books and resources to the local schools, including preschools and McGuffey. We've offered it to Queen of Peace and some other groups. Baden didn't get a lot of take on that, but the Talawanda elementary schools, middle school, and now the high school, we're back around donating to them. And it's interesting because, like the rest of us, we're trying to figure out how to do things more virtually and how to help the digital library at the high school. And that's a little different. We don't just buy books and give them to them. They actually have to purchase them. It's complicated, but we are working on that. And we're always welcome to new ideas on books. I mean, books are coming out all the time for all ages. So if you've got a book, send it to us. Linda Boardman, who's a retired 4th grade teacher, has been phenomenal in curating our collection and list. And we're very proud of that. And as Rachel talked about, GLSEN is amazing. The GLAD group, the SAGE group, that is a national group for seniors or aging people. They're amazing. It depends on what people are looking for. Dayton has a wonderful group called the Rainbow Elders, and 2 years ago now, they hosted a I don't know what it was called, Aging, LGBTQ and Aging Conference. Kate spoke at it. I had a student who spoke at it. We got to Stu Maddox, who is the producer who produced and directed the documentary called Gen Silent. That is a really good one for anybody to see if they haven't, about aging LGBTQ plus people. And one of the big concerns is, as we're aging and we are needing more assistance from other people, we may go back into the closet. And so that's quite horrifying in many ways, and where the partners and spouses aren't being same-sex spouses aren't being recognized, pronouns aren't being used properly. Megan Perkins, who spoke with us last month, she is a clinical pharmacist who works with families and individuals as a hospice consultant, and how to be an ally at the end of life. And she was pretty phenomenal. And in fact, I'm actually having a conversation with her tomorrow night. Anybody else jump in with other resources?
I'll jump in here. I think if you're looking for something and you're not really sure where to go, the best place is to just choose one of those organizations that Sabrina just mentioned and contact them and say, what can I read?
That's awesome. I'm going to put a question to Rachel and Maria. A question came in the chat of, what are we doing to reach out to students or communities of color in relation to everything that we've been discussing?
Anyone to talk over you, Rachel? Do you want me to go first?
Absolutely, go first.
Okay. I would say the Counseling Center is very diverse in a lot of different ways. And so I think we have connections with all different communities on campus who are marginalized. And certainly that's something that I think when we're talking to folks, we're always talking about too, is how those identities intersect and how to reach folks that we wouldn't normally reach. I think it's a great question and really important.
So in Cincinnati locally, I can talk about our clinic, is that we do have a mobile unit that one of our providers is going out in right now. They're doing primary care primarily, but able to get patients connections to the clinic. So we're actually going out to the neighborhoods that are marginalized and quite diverse. So we're not having them come to us, we're coming to them now. But also too, there are local Cincinnati groups, and they might be more widespread, but I do know that Trans Saints goes more towards people of color. And there are particular groups that do make sure that the community is included, because you're right. Yeah, if I had to stack up the majority of my patients, they often are white.
I would say that's less true for us. we have a more diverse group of clients, and we have folks of color who it might not be their most specialty, but certainly are competent in providing that kind of counseling.
I thought the documentary, at least they touched upon the intersectionality piece. They discussed how, especially around violence, issues of violence and issues of unemployment, how trans people of color and trans women of color, when we're talking about violence, how how the rates are increased when we're talking about both violence and unemployment. And so when people are going way back to the question about what can people do, definitely there are things obviously on an interpersonal level we can be doing to make trans people feel more included in our communities. But on a more macro level, we can be advocating for policies, legislation, laws that address issues of poverty for everyone, which would then also help trans individuals who are dealing with poverty and in poverty at higher rates than the general population. So that is really important as well.
I know we are getting close to being out of time, but there was a question that came in actually prior to the presentation and it can go to anybody, related to understanding or clarifying how to use pronouns and why it's important to ask individuals how they want to be referred to, or what's the best way to handle this. And again, anybody can answer this one.
I would just start by saying that pronouns are literally the easiest thing you can do to make someone's day. If someone is not out or doesn't feel like they're passing, and if you ask the pronouns and they answer, they're not going to think anything of being asked. It's just polite. It's kind of whatever. But then when you use the pronoun that they ask, if there's someone that doesn't usually get that, they're going to think about that all day. I promise you that. Conversely, if now no one here would probably do this, but if someone went out of their way to do the opposite and to misgender you with pronouns, it ruins your whole day. And it's one of those things that really has such a big domino effect because you never think about it. It's such an integral part of like who you are, though. It's like I'm talking about two people and I just throw them out. You generally know who I'm talking about just from the pronoun. And when someone uses the pronoun that you've chosen, it's just such a gender affirming thing. It just really makes you feel heard. It really makes you feel seen. It makes it feel like you're not a freak or a fraud. It just is such a, euphoric feeling. And it's such a small thing that I've never understood the vitriol against it. It's like, why? It's like the same thing of people who, it's like going out to protest people who put their, who put ketchup on the top bun versus the bottom bun. Who cares?
I think it can never be the wrong question. What pronouns do you use? I think that's never a bad question to ask anybody. And I think for folks who might be using a pronoun that you're unaccustomed to or that you might not have guessed for them, it's really affirming and it's essential, I think, in acknowledging who people are. Like if you could just imagine what it would be like as a cis person to go through your day and have somebody mispronoun you all day, it's disarming. It would be upsetting. It would be odd. You wouldn't know who they were talking to. And so I think, what Joy said is true. Like it's not only super affirming for that person, it also doesn't cause dysphoria, which is always nice when you help people feel good about themselves. So I think it's really essential. And I think a lot of people say they're worried about then making a mistake. I can tell you from being a therapist, people don't care if you make a mistake. They care about your effort. They care, if you slip, they're fine. You don't make a big deal about it. You correct it and move on. But I think that that's a big worry that people have, but the effort is what people care about.
I have my pronouns on all of my email signatures because I took Safe Zone training and they said that's one of the easiest ways to just identify that you are open and welcoming. And I was working with a family whose father was dying and the daughter called and her pronouns were her. I had to think about that. But her siblings' pronouns were different. And they were very concerned about coming back to Oxford to deal with their father and stepmother, and that people wouldn't acknowledge them in the way they wanted. And she came in my office, this was before COVID, and sat down and she said, and I have rainbow paraphernalia everywhere. And she said, before we start this, I just need to say thank you. And it started her to be able to trust me from the beginning. And it was really affirming for me that it is, Joy mentioned, it's a small gesture, but man, it goes a long way.
Yeah, and at Miami, Hannah and I had worked on putting together, Hannah Thompson and I had and a couple other people worked on putting together tips for instructors, for teachers. So in the classroom, because there's lots of talk among faculty members about how you do this. How do you do this in the classroom? How do you ask people in such a way as not putting people on the spot and different, but one way that I do it is to send out an email to all my students before class even begins, before the semester even starts, and just share my pronouns and say, let me know if you'd like to introduce yourself to me via email if you'd like, and let me know your pronouns if you'd like. But then I also educate my other students who may be asking, like, why is she asking pronouns? Especially students from some other countries. They might not understand why we're focusing on pronouns. So educating students, giving them links to resources that talk about why we're asking and discussing it, so that it just becomes normalized that we share our pronouns when we're introducing ourselves.
And I think that's a great point to put out there, Kate, because one thing that a lot of people don't think of, especially people who aren't trans, is that typically the people who ask for pronouns are the people who want to be asked for their pronouns. And obviously this isn't 100% the case, but if we go around a room and everyone introduces their name, but only one person says, and my pronouns are, a lot of the time it kind of feels like coming out, because that person may feel like, oh, well, I'm the only one that's actually having to explicitly state my gender identity or explicitly identify myself in that way to other people. Whereas if everyone goes around the room and says, my name is Joy, I go she, her. My name is so-and-so, I use he, him. My name is so-and-so, I go they, them. It gives people, an opportunity to identify themselves that they may not normally have. For people who use they, them, but might just find it easier to use he or she throughout the day. It gives them a chance to actually express that identity in a safe space. And also it makes it so that people who want to make sure that they put out a pronoun are able to do so without directly outing themselves. And even if you might think that it feels like, oh, well, it's obvious, I can tell that this person is trans, the fact that they don't feel like they have to come out and do that makes all the difference. And even if you do think that you're right, you might not be.
Wow, what a discussion. Thank you all for your time, your thoughtfulness. I know we will have other questions that will come up as a residual of this. I would encourage people watching to let us know other resources that you think are helpful, that we can add to a list that we can send out to everybody. But also, we're always looking for other topics of discussion for our community meetings. Next month, I don't have the specifics of it, but I believe we have a woman from India who is, I think she's a lawyer. They're a lawyer, and their work is research and maybe advocacy in regards to human trafficking. I clearly need more information on this, but we will get that out. We are going to have some sort of a Pride event in June, but we will be participating with the Spectrum students this coming Saturday, and that's 11:30 at Cook Field. Is that right, Ellie? I think so. And then we'll also get information about the Pride field hockey game, because we were still waiting to see how many numbers they can actually have there. The Hamilton Pride is doing an event that we will participate in, and that is on June 5th, which I believe is a Saturday, and it's an afternoon, maybe it's a several hour event that includes music and such. I think it's more like a festival, not a parade. And that's all I have.
Yes, and as Sabrina said, we will, to everyone who is registered for this webinar, we will send out an email with resources, as well as some of the events that we mentioned. Yes, Spectrum is doing their Pride Week right now, and they do have a Pride car parade, socially distanced and safe on campus on Saturday. So we will send those details, because there is a registration for it. But we certainly want to support our students in Spectrum. But again, thank you everyone so much. I feel like we could be talking for a lot longer, but we don't have that amount of time this evening. Is there any final parting words from anybody before we wrap it up?
If you haven't already become a member of the Oxford Area PFLAG, you can do that. It's on our website, also on our Facebook page.
Just thank you to everyone that's listening.
Absolutely.
It's important. It's probably for some of you that are joining today, it might be your first time. And so it was a good step if this was your first one. Thanks.
All right. Be safe, everyone.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Have a good evening.